Hi, I'm Holly Lake Hoagland, the Principal Research Lead for Process and Performance Management at APQC.
Hi, Holly. Nice to see you again. Jonathan Kraft with the APQC Advisory Services team, and looking forward to our conversation today.
Thanks, Jonathan. So today we're here to talk to all of you as part of an ongoing series for each of APQC's 7 tenets of process management. And today we're going to focus on this tenet of process improvement. Now, often the case, the goal of process management is to improve performance in the organization. And that can include anything from customer retention, better cycle times, lower costs, more employee satisfaction, or any other kind of goal that helps the organization improve how it performs. Now, a lot of times you could potentially pursue process improvement without looking at it from a business process management perspective. And unfortunately, a lot of organizations do that. But this can result in a lot of fragmentation, random acts of improvement. And though these improvements might seem exciting or useful in their silo, they can also have a lot of unintended consequences. So to avoid that, we always recommend looking at process improvement from kind of a bigger picture. Now, though I just said bigger picture, at its simplest, process improvement asks the question, how can we do better? And there's really kind of two major categories for process improvement there. And the first one is this idea of breakthrough improvements. And these are kind of the big picture of looking at a process and asking the question, well, why do we do this? Why do we do this process in the first place? And that kind of typically results in more substantive changes, either to a process overall or to a large system. And often what will happen is through kind of process redesign work that you're completely changing how that work gets done. Now, those are kind of a little bit more rare type of process improvement. The more common type that most people see is incremental improvement. And these are kind of smaller in scope, easier fixes, and really just ask the question, so how can we do something more efficiently? So again, small changes in part to the process or the system. It could mean we adjust a step, we add in a new type of review, create new templates or better business rules to help support people as they're executing the process.
And Holly, I'd say that the incremental ones are very often where we see those random acts of improvement. And they're not, and we'll talk about this as we go through our conversation, but they're not coordinated. They're not aligned. They're just, hey, I can go over and I can fix something in this corner, but it may break something in a different corner, or it may not be tied to what the business is ultimately important in. So I think some of the breakthroughs, again, they're more strategic. They're communicated probably more broadly to the organization. The incremental ones are the activities that have, again, good ideas, but some of those unintended consequences you talked about.
Thank you, Jonathan. That's actually a perfect additional information to kind of wrap around that from a scope of what each one of them has as far as an impact on the organization. As you can see, this idea of process improvement is kind of a complicated topic. So we've actually found out that there's a couple of key components when we talk about process improvement organizations need to keep in mind. And the first one is identification. So how do we go about pinpointing potentially improvement opportunities? And from this idea of identification, this is one of the places where we see a lot of organizations stumble because, again, those random acts of improvement occur quite a bit when we're doing little fixes throughout the business. But that can, like we said, cause a lot of potential issues if you don't have appropriate identification. One of the ways and one of the things that we've seen is we do a lot of research, and one of the questions we ask is, for organizations, what is your kind of improvement approach or culture? And there's usually 4 categories that we talk about. One is none. So once that process has been documented, put into flow, no real efforts are ever made to make improvements on it. The second one is ad hoc, and that's the one we see the vast majority of organizations align with. And this is that improvements are done inconsistently. They're done whenever a problem arises or somebody looks at something slightly different. A third version is scheduled, and that means improvement efforts occur on a schedule. So we take a look at our process A every quarter, once a year, just to make sure that it's still performing effectively, or that we need to make sure that it's still fitting with the goals of the business and look for those identification of opportunities. And then the last one is this idea of continuous improvement. And that's where the idea of improvement is ingrained in the organization and employees are empowered to identify them in the flow of work and make those kind of decisions. So I always like to think of it as the crawl, walk, run approach when we're talking about identification. And the crawl is really kind of that ad hoc. They come up randomly. We will address them when they become a problem. The walk one is then kind of that idea of creating a schedule for reviewing those improvement opportunities for your processes. We see a lot of organizations who will put like reminders that once a quarter their process owner needs to go and assess 3 different processes to look at their performance, get some feedback from the SMEs to see if there's anything that needs to be adjusted or changed. And then the run one is that idea of ongoing improvement, and that's where we use performance measures that help show acceptable ranges of variance, so we can identify when there's an opportunity. And we have that ability and support employees and train them so they can identify opportunities. They know what the process is for making improvements. And they work collaboratively with their process owners, just kind of consistently.
And Holly, I think you bring up some good points there when you talk about the idea of really no identification, ad hoc, schedule, or continuous. What we also see organizations that we work with that are more mature within their just overall 7 tenets maturity are continue to be more focused on that kind of scheduled and continuous focus versus some of that more ad hoc or none. And so when you talk about identification, I think that's an important part of it. We need to identify, process A is broken or process B is broken. But the challenge that we have is, well, if process A is broken and process B are broken, how do we focus on which one do we go after first? We might not have the time, the resources, the money, or even maybe the knowledge to potentially go after that. So we really need to focus a lot around some of the prioritization and selection. And there's a couple tools out there. There's one of them on our resource library. We call it our criteria testing matrix that you can use that essentially gives you an opportunity to say, are we looking at process A? Are we looking at process B? And what are the criteria that are required in order for us to ultimately fix process A or B? And you can create that criteria within your organization in terms of what you're looking for, but it takes that kind of gut feeling and makes it a little bit more quantitative and qualitative. It says, well, I think it should be A, but maybe it should be B. But it also does an opportunity, and it says it does make it more qualitative and quantitative. So people's feelings don't get hurt. Well, it needs to be process A or process B. So we need to make sure we're looking at it from that perspective. The other idea when it comes to some of the prioritization and selection is really looking at what's going on within the business. And some of the tenets that we've talked about already, again, you can see how these all interplay and interlink with one another, but what's the strategic goals of the organization? Does one process have a tighter link to what the strategic goals of the organization are this year over the next 3 to 5 years? And then also, what is our kind of capacity around change management? Are we asking people to change just because we want to make them change? And does this become a random act of improvement? Or are we looking at, well, this is an opportunity for us to really leverage some of our change management principles and leverage, to Holly's point, some of that crawl, walk, run methodology in terms of how do we want to specifically roll this out? So really thinking about, as you're going through not only the identification, but which activities you want to focus on, what knowledge you have, what methodology are you using from a improvement perspective within your organization is really an important component that individuals sometimes overlook, and that identification and selection really eliminates a lot of those random acts of improvement that we talk about. The other idea when it comes to some of the process improvement activities is really around sustainability. And Holly talked a little bit about this as well, but it's the opportunity for us to say, okay, we've identified something, we have gone through the prioritization and selection, and we have improved something, process A, process B, whatever example you'd like to use there. But how do we really make sure that we're maintaining or supporting an activity in the process over the long term? What are we really doing to make sure that the activities are continuing to perform in the manner that we want them, in the order that we want them? The process is being followed in the way that we're asking, in the new way, versus, and we've all had this problem, kind of regression into specifically the way it used to be, So how do we make sure that we're making sure that sustainability is happening? So are we leveraging lessons learned from other groups or other organizations that are already running, or already leveraging this process? Are we doing some type of reinforcement that says we need to make sure that we're doing training every 30 to 60 to 90 days to make sure that that activity is happening? Or do we need to be doing some type of process observation work just to say, hey, they are regressing a little bit, and they're not necessarily regressing intentionally. It's just human nature. So that sustainability piece is really important as well. The other opportunity that I just want to mention as we go through this, once we've done the identification, once we've done the prioritization, and we've actually done some of the activities around sustainability, what we also often find is process A and process B might be run by two completely different process owners. In fact, they probably are. But there's also an opportunity for us to say, just because we picked process A based upon the criteria selection, based upon what was important to the organization, all of those types of activities, is we also need to realize that process B is still a viable process improvement option. There's still an opportunity for us to potentially look at it. And maybe we need to look at that 6 months down the road, because 6 months down the road, process B now does tie more to strategic objectives, or maybe the industry has changed, or maybe our customers or our clientele are asking for something different. And so process B is now something that we do want to look at from a process improvement point of view. So just because maybe your process or the process that you think should have been identified from an improvement perspective wasn't selected, doesn't mean that it goes away. It sits on the shelf maybe for a little bit of time, but it doesn't just get eliminated from the process improvement selection or options or observations, because I think that's really important for organizations to think about. So we'll discuss this a little bit more in the blog. Holly and I have a couple of kind of at-home examples that we often use when it comes to some of the blogging, because I think they're relevant, and we can always kind of relate to those based upon being married individuals, based upon having children. But again, from a process improvement perspective, really make sure that you're putting some structure and some activity into not only to the identification of it, but also how are you selecting it and what are you doing from a long-term point of view.
The last thing I'd add on to that, and because you talked about how they connect, right? And since we start looking at identification, we look at prioritization, sustainability, and all of that, really looking at how process improvement ties into your governance structures, right? Because you need that objective steering committee who has that big picture view to be able to look through those business cases using those standardized criteria that you have, or the matrix, to help make those decisions about what's important, and making sure that's done at least regularly as far as that kind of big picture overview. And really then relying on the governance and the business through your process owners and your partnership with them to really drive home that sustainability part.
Great point. Great. And again, just another example of how these 7 tenets are not individual silos, but really touch along one another as they go through any type of just overview or process, not only process improvement, just process maturity as well.
Okay. Well, thank you all. I hope you've found this enlightening. We will be conducting additional videos, as well as you'll be able to access ones across all of the tenets here at ABQC. We hope you have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.